Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Calling Within. Today, I'm hosting a very exciting guest on. Her name is Dr. Radhika, the spiritual psychologist. She's also a founder of a 12-month healing certification. So, Radhika, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here, Veronica. It's a pleasure.
It's going to be such an interesting conversation. As I told you earlier, I love all things psychology, all things therapy, and spirituality. So the fact that you do all of those things combined is just such a joy to explore further. And I feel like these days, especially, people are into therapy, into like psychology, but when we combine those two things, we get proper healing. So I'm very excited to pick your brain a little bit on how
Yes.
we can heal everywhere, not just mentally.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It's important. It's important. Like things have shifted so much and in like how I see, in how I perceive healing anyway. I don't know if the rest of the world is catching up or not, but I think people are so much more open to not just like sitting in a therapy room and being in this really formal kind of environment. And yeah, there's just a lot that's like shifted from that place. And the way that I work is so different in that way. So yeah, I'd love to dive into all of that.
Absolutely. And we'll definitely get there. But before we start this conversation and talking about your work specifically, I'd love to give a listener a take on your life and your background. So could you talk about who you are now and how did you get here?
Yes. Okay. So I feel like I am such a different person to who I was last week, let alone like 4 years ago, 10 years ago, and so on. And like I have just experienced so many radical shifts in my life in the last 4 years, really, from doing the inner healing work, from connecting more with the spiritual path. And I guess the place that I have come from is joy, but also a lot of like hidden pain and just, I guess, like accepting that, okay, like I'm just going to live a life that's fragmented where I'm not whole. Because it's like, if you don't know anything different, you just continue in the pattern that you're in. And it's not until you start digging deep that you realize, hold on, that pattern doesn't actually feel good. And yeah, there were just so many things, I guess, from my life, for starters, being the first generation born Tamil Sri Lankan in England, being brought up in England, really with two different identities, this kind of being brought up in British culture and also being brought up in a parenting style that was much more traditional Asian, South Asian. And the combination of those two things was really challenging to navigate. And it was, I think, challenging for everybody, my parents, for us as children. And this is where like so many generational wounds can come in to play. And so I'm a mother. I've been with my partner for 23 years, I think, this year. And it was a lot of like stuff coming up around all of those things, but just these long-standing wounds that were sitting with me, and honestly feeling like I just couldn't be in my authenticity, that I couldn't be in my fullest expression. And there was just so many pieces of shame that I was operating from. And yeah, I guess like the person who I am now is so different in that I take radical like self responsibility for my wounds, and like I'm responsible for healing the things that come up. I'm responsible for getting the right support that I need. And the way that I see it is that any pattern that no longer feels aligned, so say for example, a money wound or my relationship with food or whatever it might be. And there's different wounds that might emerge as you evolve. The way that I see it now is like that's such an invitation to step into greater depth of like what needs to be kind of transmuted, what needs to be cleared, what needs to be fully seen and given permission for within myself. That I don't need to basically be stuck in like a 10-year-old version of myself. I get to choose to liberate that. So it's just a very different place to where I was a few years ago, which was just accepting a state of being.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing all of this and being so vulnerable. And your journey sounds very familiar to me because I was
Mm.
born in Russia, but I'm also half Georgian. I was also brought up in like this mixture of cultures, and I couldn't really understand my identity. And now I live in the UK, and I'm not sure how much I identify with those cultures anymore. And it feels like a blur. And it's so beautiful that you were able to, first of all, understand what those wounds are, then accept them, and then work on yourself. And it really again goes to show that healing is possible for anybody who is struggling
Yes.
out there. It's 100% possible. It does take work, it does take some time, but you can absolutely get there. And I guess then my question to you is, because you mentioned spirituality and coming to it from this kind of rounded holistic perspective, what is the difference between approaching things spiritually and doing psychology from a spiritual angle versus just the usual kind of the mental health counselor route?
So I guess the difference with bringing spirituality is that you are working with something that is unseen and you are trusting the path. You're trusting the path of the unseen. You're trusting the intuitive parts within you that are calling or guiding you somewhere. So this is what a lot of people shy away from this, especially psychologists or scientists or the majority of people in the Western world actually, because you cannot scientifically see something. Just because you cannot see it doesn't mean that it's not powerful and that it isn't there. And so we're living in such a culture of we need evidence for everything. And I remember as a psychologist, like that is the thing that was like kept on being drummed into us. Like, there's no evidence for that. Like, where's the research? Where's the research? And like, whilst that holds merit, I guess what I've seen in my work is that it is so powerful what can happen when you combine like different approaches and you work with somebody's faith, you work with somebody's inner trust, which is actually inner trust is actually you're developing relationship with something that is so much greater than you. If you're trusting that inner part of yourself, you're trusting God or universe or however you want to describe it. I say God because it's much more powerful to me. So you by trust by it's things like by stepping into your full authenticity, your expression, by moving towards your desires and the things that you want to create in your life. I was born this earth and like my vibe, my excitement with certain things, my passion, the way that I like move through life or the way that I move my body and the things that light me up, like that is so different to what is going to light you up, what your passions are, how you move through on this earth. And that wasn't just like magically, do you know what I mean? That's not just that's our soul. That's our soul. And like when you think of like the 4-year-old version of you and that playful part of you, you know how you can connect with that small version of yourself. And there's that version of you that is ever present no matter how old you are.
Yeah.
Can you connect with that part of you? So that part of you, like, where does that come from? That's your soul. That's the way that that's the way that I can connect with it. It's like, that's me. And I believe we were put on this earth to step as much as possible into our fullness. And that's what a lot of people struggle with. That's what a lot of people need support with healing around. They're not in their authenticity. They're not living life in their authenticity. So you then get these challenges that arise, like depression, anxiety, health issues, trauma related pieces that create disconnection to ourselves in an even deeper way.
Wow, that's so beautifully well put. And if I can share my experience with this, because I'm also
Yes.
spiritual and I believe in certain things that people consider woo woo. I accept that. I know people have different opinions, but as you said, if we can't see something, doesn't mean that's true. And I was working with this therapist through my insurance, and she kind of straight away told me she's atheist. And in the beginning, when we were working together, my spirituality is such a big part of my life, and certain things to her I was describing from the spiritual angle. And I remember once I mentioned something about past lives and karma. And she just looked at me like I was a crazy person. I just thought it was the funniest thing. Like, it didn't offend me, but I just thought, oh, she probably does not get those people often in her office. It was quite hilarious.
Yes, and I guess there's the I guess like the people that think it's woo woo, that's okay. Like, that's okay that people think that it's woo woo, but it's also because they haven't gone into that exploration.
Totally. And again, as you were saying, there is this obsession with research. I think for certain things, we don't actually need to do that much research to know they're good for us. It's kind of
Yes.
like do we how much more research do we need to understand that Coca-Cola is bad for our health? Like, how much
Mm.
more research? It just some things are just common sense. It's I was talking to another guest on my podcast, and he was saying, do we really need much research to understand meditation is good for us? What if you observe your own body and collectively,
Yes.
people become calmer, more mindful? How much more research do we need to tell people, meditation is good for you because research said that, as opposed to
Mm.
you with your own experience discovered that it's good for you? It's again,
Yes.
it goes to show like what is more important to you, like other people saying things or your
Mm.
own intuition tapping into how you're feeling within you. I personally believe that this whole navigation system that was given to us is it has a purpose and it shows us things, it directs us. So for me, it's the greatest tragedy that in the world we unfortunately ignore that.
Yes, the greatest research is what you're feeling within you about whether something is feeling aligned or it's not.
Yeah,
That's the
100%.
that's the greatest piece of research. And yeah, a lot of people will disagree with that, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But it's like that thing of when, like, if somebody invites you to something and you get that feeling in you of, yeah, I really want to do that thing. Or you get that feeling of, no, I don't want to do it. Like, that is your inner guidance, like you're talking about. That's your inner guidance. Nobody else can choose that for you. Only you can.
Yeah, very well put. And it's such a bit of a lonely journey. I'd say it doesn't have to be a negative way, but
Mm,
only you can go within. Nobody else can do it for you. This is the step you
yes.
have to take. Even working with those beautiful practitioners like yourself, therapists, coaches, etc. That's amazing that they can help you get there. But you ultimately will have to be the one that is aligned with what you want. Nobody knows better than yourself.
Yes.
You touched on depression earlier, and that's actually something that I've struggled with, and I know loads of people are
Mm,
struggling with. I think Rishi Sunak came on the news the other day and he said more people than ever are on mental health leave, which is just such a
mm.
tragedy. And I wanted to ask you, as somebody who had suffered with it in the past, what is your version or view? Why, from a spiritual angle, why do people suffer with this unfortunate mental health condition, and how can they help themselves through it?
I mean, depression is like, the way that I view depression is that somewhere along the line you have been disconnected with your joy, and that is like it. And with depression, it's such a slow creeper. It really is. Like it can be such a slow creeper. Like I was reflecting on myself like the last few months because we've had like back-to-back viruses. I've basically been in like a bit of a hermit mode, which does not like align with who I am actually. And I was saying to my husband just a few days ago, I think I've been in a bit of low mood, a bit of a bit of depression. And when I look at it, it all makes sense because we've not had much light. It's been raining a lot. So there's that disconnection from like natural light. There's been disconnection from social situations more than normal because we've been ill. I've been in like certain habits of like just being in the house too much because I work at home, work from home. So there's all these little pieces which can then mean that actually you become disconnected from that joy. And also when we kind of bring in traumatic experiences, that also creates this shocking disconnection to within our bodies, within our nervous system, and our bodies go into that like response of protection, and we become numb to life because it doesn't feel safe to feel. It doesn't feel safe to feel. So your body kicks into that mode of protection, and then you're feeling like this sense of low mood. You're struggling to get out of bed, your motivation is low, you can't be bothered to see anybody, you can't be bothered to look after yourself, all of those things. So with anything like depression, it's a disconnection ultimately from your sense of self on a whole level, not just on a mind level, but on a nervous system, bodily level, and on a spiritual level as well, because there's something about depression where you aren't living in activated pleasure, you aren't living in activated joy. Somewhere along the line you've lost connection with that.
Yeah. And actually, there's a book that comes to mind. It's called Lost Connections. I don't know whether you've read it. And it talks about kind of the 12 causes and 12 disconnections that we have in our life.
Okay, I haven't. It sounds interesting.
It's a very, very good read. I really recommend it. And I was reading it during COVID when I was kind of going through a low period. And I was like, wow, that makes sense. And like, I think the first chapter is disconnection from work and purpose. And I was like, wow,
Yes,
it's like, hits me so
yes.
deep. And
Which
that's,
is,
that, sorry,
sorry,
go on.
I was just going to say, which is why so many people struggle when they retire. People retire, they look forward to retirement, they retire, and then they're like, they go through a really difficult time. A lot of people go through a really difficult time because they've lost their sense of purpose. And so it
Yeah.
can end up feeling really, really hard.
Yeah. And again, I think discovering what your purpose is or where you derive purpose from is one of those parts of the spiritual journey and connection back to ourselves. That's
Yes.
my personal belief that those purposes are programmed into us. We come here with certain purposes, certain destinies, certain karmas to fulfill. And this is your
Yes.
duty to discover them. Like ultimately for me, the way how I view those disconnections, right? It's there will be signals like depression, like low mood. And this is your signal. Okay, maybe what I'm doing right now isn't aligned with my purpose. So maybe I should
Yes,
rethink something
exactly.
else.
Yes, exactly, exactly. It's like all of these pieces, whether it's anxiety, depression, whatever, this is an invitation. And that's the shift we can create, because the Western traditional perspective on depression is there's something wrong with you and you need to treat yourself. When we take a more holistic perspective, a more spiritual perspective, the question actually is, what is out of alignment?
Mm.
Where is it that you need to feed your soul? Where is it that you're not giving yourself permission? Where is it that
Wow.
you're stuck in like conditioned ways of being, and it feels scary to actually live life on your terms?
Wow. And I love that you brought up the idea of a soul. And that's something I'd love to dive deeper into with you, because I feel like a lot of the times this word is like thrown around, oh, like soul that, soul that. In terms of your
Mm.
understanding in the work that you do when you're talking about disconnection from our soul guidance, and getting back to it? What, in your perspective, is a soul, and how can we connect back to it?
That's a good question. Soul to me is what I was saying before about the version of you that's always been there. Like that to me is soul, the version of me that moves through lifetimes, that moves through whatever my past life was and before that and so on. And it's like that spirit is navigates through these different lives. And so that is here in this body in this time right now. I guess that's the simplest way that I could explain
Yeah.
it from my terms.
Yeah, no, that's very much kind of my idea of the soul as well. And from the readings that I was doing, for me, it's all interconnected, right? Like the past lives, the spirit that was living in the previous body, something that's alive in you. And even with like what you were saying earlier about research and proving things, it's like, can we prove we see life in the person? Like when a person just died, like what had left him? Because there's clearly something that's missing now. Like, of course, we see kind of the secondary characteristics of life, like the heart beating and stuff, but where's this energy? Like we can't necessarily see it, but we know it's there.
Yes, yeah. It's like when my dad passed away, and you could, yeah, thank you. You could feel at some point that his soul had transitioned. It was just like a feeling. I don't know how to explain it. I think by then I was on the spiritual path. I was really interested in my lineage and ceremony and all the rituals that we went through in supporting his transition. And so I was kind of deeply connected to that process. And yeah, I was in my head, the priority was like, let's make sure it's a smooth transition for his soul. Like that's why we're doing these rituals, so that he can make that transition. This is like when you're born into this earth, onto this earth, it's like that's like a traumatic process. And so it's the way that I see it is similar when you die. Like when you die, your soul is exiting, and that transition needs support, which is why rituals and ceremony and all of those beautiful practices, you see it in every culture. You see it in every culture because we have historically learnt somewhere along the line as a world globally that this is what we do. And there's so much wisdom in those ancient practices, which again are lost to more westernized, I guess, perspectives on healing and death and so on.
I find it so fascinating. It's because ancient people knew. You look at those things and
Yes.
it's like they were more connected to their hearts and to their soul. We're more mind driven. And
Yeah.
how did they know all of those things before the scientific proof and research? Like, how did they know the earth was round? How did they know the earth was
Yes.
evolving around? How? It's just like, it's a reasonable
Mm,
question. Like, they had some
mm.
kind of means to accessing this knowledge that we don't have, or we need research for it. We can't just tap in and
Yeah.
tap into the Akashic records, whatever it is, universal consciousness. Unfortunately, we've lost that ability. My
Mm,
belief is we are on a trajectory to come back to our hearts and to come back to this space where we can tap in. But
mm,
unfortunately, the world isn't too catered for it at the moment. That's a whole other conversation.
mm.
But I
Bec-
actually wanted, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, from my perspective, it's because people were so deeply connected to nature. Nature holds so much, nature holds the wisdom. So because there was such a deep connection to simplicity, and there wasn't the distraction of phones, of iPads and Netflix and all of those things, there was that like deeper rootedness into presence. And yeah, that's one of the challenges that we have now, isn't it? That there's so much beauty and opportunity, but there's also the challenge of disconnection, actually.
100%. And all of those things that you mentioned, iPads, technology, they all take our energy. And I don't know, I assume we'd notice this, but like when we're in nature, we feel more full of energy and it can be very unconscious. And once you
Yes.
tap into it, you're like, oh, why am I feeling so much better? Like, speaking of research, right? It's scientifically proven. I think if you look at a beautiful landscape in nature, you already feel better. Like your hormones, I think it's serotonin or oxytocin or whatever. Like you start
Yeah.
getting this buzz and rush, and you're just like, wow, like I'm part of this. I came out of there. Like it's there for a reason. And it's such a shame that we unfortunately don't use it as much.
Yes. But we can
Yeah.
find, yeah, we can, it's all around us, isn't it? And yeah, that's where we get to choose to reconnect.
Absolutely. And speaking of energy, right? Like I mentioned how some things are energy takers versus givers. Where do you see energy in the work that you do? How do you heal using energy? How do you cleanse from, I don't know, maybe past stored emotions, like trapped energy? Is this something you work with? And how do you use it
Mm.
in with your clients?
The way that I guess that I work with my clients and with myself around energy is it I work more so with connection with the body. So I guess there's different practices. So you can work with the body to process the dense, heavy energies that are present. So the other day, for example, with this virus that I've got, like I felt so much anxiety. I felt like this heaviness, this I'm usually quite a pretty balanced person, but I just started feeling so anxious about everything. And I went and I wanted to avoid going within. I wanted to like just sit and watch Netflix because it was easier. And I thought, no, I'm going to go and sit in front of my altar and I'm going to make a cup of cacao and I am just going to sit in that space. And as soon as I sat in that space and I said
Bless
a
you.
prayer, I said a prayer and I just started crying. And there were just so many tears. And if I hadn't come to that space where I know I can go to process my emotions, to sit in my vulnerability, then I probably would have just walked around for another few days with all of that stored energy and all of that emotion, just walking around with it, carrying it like a heavy rock. And so we can work with what is there by through prayer, through moving it through our bodies. I work with a lot of clients like through getting them to locate where something is being felt, or if they have pain in a particular part of their body, what is that communicating? So it's kind of going to that deeper level of understanding, okay, actually our body is a wisdom keeper. When we have pain on like one side or the other side or in our lower back or we've got digestive issues or whatever, usually an emotional rooting there. And when you unpick it, it makes complete sense why that person is struggling with that particular pain in that particular place. So we work with with that energy. So if somebody is like feeling a lot of lower back pain or that there's like a lot of bloating, for example, and everything is connected to the root, the energy of the root chakra, then it's looking at where is it that somebody feels unsafe? Where is it that how is it that we can create that deeper sense of safety for that person within themselves? So it kind of goes like so much deeper than a mindset thing.
100%. It's all interconnected. Like if there is, I don't know, if there is a digestive issue, like I think even now the research is coming out about IBS, you would think, oh,
Yes.
a certain food triggers it, a gluten or whatever. But now there's so much research that people who are prone to anxiety are more likely
Yes.
to get IBS, which just makes so much sense, right? So again, it goes to show
Mm.
how important it is to feel emotions, release them. Unfortunately, I feel like these days, and I've certainly been so guilty of that, numbing is the easy route and
Yes.
pushing things out. But it's so difficult for us humans to go within and feel. Like we're so scared. We think, the emotion is going to kill us, or it's an
Yes.
unsafe environment, as you were saying, and it's there for a reason, right? An emotion is a guiding system for something. Do I want to go there? Do I not want to go there? And again, it's there for a reason. Like, why do we experience emotion? To guide us.
Yes, exactly. And the other thing is like people think that you also need to be sitting with your pain for days, for weeks, for months. And actually, you can go and have a good cry or move your body in if you're angry and process things through your body so that that is witnessed. You're witnessing that part of you rather than ignoring it, and you're activating it in a controlled environment and allowing it to be released and seen rather than repressing it. When we do that, it that can take literally like 20 minutes. Do you see what I mean? Like, it doesn't have to be this, right, I need to go into therapy for like months and months. Like, sometimes we've got to do that, but what we can learn over time is that actually it's safe to go and process your emotions, and that you don't need to spend hours in it. You can see it, witness it, and then move on with your day.
Absolutely. I think it was Michael Singer, the spiritual teacher from the US. He said it's very important not to block the heart, or like it's a lot harder to cleanse yourself from those emotions as opposed to prevent yourself from clogging up the heart chakra or other chakras with it.
Yes, yeah. And this is the thing with, like, I guess one of the challenges, or like the flaws, I guess, of therapy, of traditional kind of approaches, is you can stay stuck in the pain. You can just stay stuck in the pain rather than creating the root of a desired future and taking responsibility for yourself, and like stepping into that space of, I may have experienced this pain from these really awful, challenging things, but I'm responsible for what I do with that pain. And that
100%.
that's the bit that like feels like there's something missing in like the traditional spaces. And I say that as somebody who has received has received support myself through the traditional route, and I'm not saying that wasn't helpful, but if and I get a lot of clients coming to me that have worked with psychologists or have worked with therapists, and there's just this feeling of something is missing or I'm stuck.
And it's funny, when you were saying something is missing, right? We all, I think, have this innate mechanism of searching for something that's missing. And I was reading a book
Mm,
about, I can't remember, I think it was about the author's sort of eating struggles and anxiety struggles. And she
mm,
was saying how I always had a God-shaped hole in my life and I didn't know what to fill it with.
mm.
And I feel like a lot of people are struggling with this, right? They have this God-shaped hole or spirituality-shaped hole and they don't know what to fill it with. They might not even be aware with it. But I can just tell, like, you from my experience, once spirituality started entering my life, that hole
Mm.
has been filled. It's just like there was something missing. And I'm like,
Yes.
wow, there's this extra puzzle. Of course, different things work for different people. We all on different journeys and we can hold things differently. But I feel like it's just so important to know that there's this other way. There's something beyond us that we can surrender to, that we can work with. And then suddenly
Yes.
you look at life from a completely different perspective.
Yes. Yeah. Part of spirituality is learning to live in gratitude, to learning to live and view life from more of an abundant lens, and to come back to the simplicity of what is here, whilst also leaning into possibility.
Yeah, 100%. And actually, there's a question that popped into my head that I really want to ask you.
Hmm.
I'm sure you have a lot of female clients, and
Yes.
us as women, we've obviously experienced very challenging, unique problems that the other gender doesn't experience. In your work, what do you see women struggling with more than men, and how do you empower women to overcome those challenges specifically?
There's a lot of challenges around the mother wound. And when I say the mother wound, I mean not just the relationship with your mother, but the lineage of wounds that come from being a woman in a patriarchal society, and what the pain, the suffering, the having to be third in line in life. That's what women have been taught for generations, that their needs are below their husbands, below their sons. And so like that has been conditioned into us. It's still present. Like we are still living in a patriarchal society. As much as we think that we have like broken through things, it is still present for sure. So we have been conditioned with a lot of like, this is where like some things are cellular. It's been imprinted on us in such a deep way. So for the women that come to me, there's so much work often around deconditioning, claiming permission, so much around like, I can't do that. I can't be this version of me. I can't live life in this way. There's so much around expectations of around partnerships, around children, around all of those things. And there's a lot of pressure there.
100%. And I can so relate to that. And I
Sorry.
feel no, that's okay. That's completely fine. And yeah, I feel the pain of women collectively. It's such a tragedy in today's society. And I'm an optimistic person, and I do think, and I see that we are sort of moving away from this. There are so many amazing, incredible female role models that are so empowered, that can empower young women and young girls. And we are moving away from this idea that my needs are less than. Like, no, actually, you owe this to yourself to take care of your needs. And as a byproduct, like other people will thank you. It's me first. And then
Yes.
it's just like, how can you help another person if you're not abundant yourself? Of course you can help, but at what level energetically this help will be? That's kind of what I'm always thinking about. And yeah, my heart is aching very much. And especially like in the Western society, of course, there's issues, but in other countries that are less developed, there's even more issues. And it pains me. And I really hope through those kind of podcasts that they'll listen to them and they'll think, oh, okay, actually, it's okay to have my needs and to want them to be fulfilled. That's completely normal. That's part of the human experience. And yeah,
Yes.
it's just, I think it's such a tragedy. And everything you said about the expectation is so true. Like, there's no thing as a dad guilt. I've not really heard about it that much, but
I
there is
mean,
mom
there
guilt.
is definitely like what I see as well is the father wound. So the father wound can be around the feeling of like the fear of rejection, the fear of abandonment, seeking the love of partners in because you didn't receive it from your father. So like that can really come in as well in terms of how were men historically, and this is culturally dependent as well, how have men been taught to be? And I just look at one generation before me. I look at my dad, and he had so much armor. He had so much armor because he thought he had to show up in this strict way. He didn't know how to be. He didn't know how to be in actually in that emotionally available place. He didn't know how to be in his softness. So he showed up in his strictness. And yeah, so there can be that wound that comes through as well. But I think like it's different to the wound of the mother of what women have carried for sure. And so it's that again, it's an invitation. It's like we don't need to, we can see that, and we can do some of that inner work to liberate and to make choices that free ourselves from that conditioning.
And there's so much that comes from childhood. You almost can't deny the importance of it.
Yes.
And then my question to you is, so you mentioned you're a mother, and what advice do you have for future parents or current parents? How can they cultivate this nourishing relationship with their children? And of course, certain things will happen, like nobody's perfect in terms of their parenting styles, but what are the sort of tips that you have for those parents, how they can
Mm,
raise healthy children on all levels, spiritually, mentally, emotionally?
yeah. So the first thing I would say is you are going to fuck up. Like, you cannot be a perfect parent, whatever the hell that like is supposed to be. And like, I think there's this message that I see sometimes, which is like, do all the inner healing work so that you don't pass on your wounds to your children, which is true. It's true, but you are constantly in evolution. So like, I look at the version of myself when my son was like 3, and they were really his formative years. And I know how important those years were. And I look back at it and I think, oh my gosh, like that version of me, like I see her now, like in her vulnerability and the challenges. But I also know that I did a good enough job. And like that's the piece, like you can have these mess ups and you can also be good enough. And I think that's really important to hold on to. And the other piece is like, you might have these like mess ups where you don't show up in the best way that you should, and you lose it because you're tired and you've had enough of a child not listening to you or whatever. And the piece that I always try and lean into is, this is my responsibility to like navigate what is coming up for me in this relationship with my son. It's not his responsibility to navigate me. And that's exactly how I guess emotional wounds are formed, when children learn that they have to navigate themselves around the parent in order to please them. And I can see it with my son sometimes. It's quite hard. Like, it's one thing supporting other people to like lead themselves in relationships. It's a whole other thing doing it yourself when you're in the situation. And my son is like my everyday teacher for how I desire to show up in a better way. He's always a teacher to me around, okay, I'm not present, like I'm distracted. Or where is it that I need to take responsibility to challenge him a little bit, and not just like take a back seat and be like, okay, just do what you want. All of those kind of pieces that come through as he's getting older as well. And it's just continually changing. So as he's growing up, it's like, okay, how do I want to show up here? And that's the bit. Whereas I think when you're not conscious of how you're showing up in the relationship, you're just acting on wounds. You're just continually acting on wounds and blaming the child, and like not taking responsibility for your anger, for your tiredness, for your frustration, and just taking it out on the child. So that's the piece. Like, we're the adults. We've got to take the responsibility.
100%. And it really spoke to me. And especially like you mentioned, doing the inner work. And I do think it benefits everyone, the children, yourself, all of your relationships in your
Yes.
life, money in your life, everything, the energy around you, the aura is just, everything is going to get better. You got to do the step and you got to take responsibility. That's what you were
Mm.
saying, right? Like, ultimately, if somebody made you angry, like the anger arose in you, right? So there was
Mm.
something within you that got triggered and you got angry. It's you
Yes.
can blame the other person, fine, but like for some person, they might not have gotten angry by listening to what the person said. So ultimately, it is something within us that we need to work for us, right? Like it's a guiding system that's showing, okay, there is something that's unhealed there. I should probably do some work.
Mm. Yes. Or there's something that's like, where I feel like my boundaries are being violated. So where do I need to strengthen my boundaries? So there's that like crucial bit between taking responsibility doesn't mean that you um lie flat and like just take everybody's shit. You don't have to be a doormat. So the inner work actually is like, where do I need to say no? Where do I need to communicate loving boundaries? Because I think sometimes with the words like inner work, inner healing, sometimes I think like there's a bit of a misinterpretation around it, maybe that like that you're just sitting around crying. No, actually, it's like, where do you need the fire where do you need the fire to make good choices for yourself? Where do you need
Yeah.
to like step into your power? Where do you need to say, no, you're not treating me in the way that I deserve to be treated. I'm not going to be treated like that. So that's like that's the powerful side of the inner work, because you don't then allow other people's projections onto you, and when they do come in, how to process that and move on from it.
Totally. And again, speaking about raising children, the children, they look at you as an example, right? So if you have done all of this and if you're emotionally mature, in most cases, they will act like this when they grow up, right? Like, of course, you need
Mm.
to teach the children, but if you say, oh, like, don't get angry, sit with your emotions, and you never do it yourself as a parent, there's going to be a conflict within them. Like, oh, my parent is telling me this, but they're not actually doing this. Like, what should I listen to?
Yes.
On your website and your social medias, it says that you do something called multi-modality healing. Can you explain what it actually is and how it can help people?
Yes. So what I've learned, I guess, over time in how I'm supporting people is that healing and growth, and this is within myself as well, it comes on a psychological, spiritual, somatic, embodiment level, and also this piece around empowerment. And so, what I teach and how I support people is to use an approach that encompasses multimodalities. So, it encompasses different ways of healing. And that's what I teach in the Academy of Healing. It's a 12-month coaching certification where you can learn an approach where you're grounded in psychology and the evidence-based stuff, like the people that the information we actually do need to know to create safe spaces and to learn how to hold space in a way that is grounded and safe. But it brings in the spirituality side. It brings in this piece around how do we support healing and growth from those different lenses. How can we incorporate the body into healing and growth? So it's like a very different certification. And the other piece around it is when I, for example, did my doctorate and I was learning to become a psychologist, none of it was about me and what I uniquely had to bring. It was all about learn all of this information and then go and do it. So what the way that I see it is that there's that untapped resource within yourself that makes you incredibly magnetizing. You have unique gifts. Each of us have unique gifts. We have our own lineages. We have our own ancestry, which holds so much wisdom. And we get to bring all of who we are into the spaces that we are leading and guiding people through. So that's what I teach on this 12-month journey. It's like activating the healer within you and teaching people how to move into that space of becoming a mentor, a guide, a coach in a really multifaceted, multi-dimensional way. And it's a personal evolution journey as well.
That sounds awesome. Do you need any prerequisites to enroll into the
No,
program?
you don't. The only thing that I say is to really encompass being a space holder for others what I would suggest you do is, what is more important than learning and educating yourself on how to hold spaces is doing the inner work. So if you're at the very start of an inner healing journey, then I would suggest that you do some of that work first, because when we become space holders for others, when we become coaches, guides, however you want to call yourself, it's so much more potent and powerful when we've done some of that inner healing work first off, and we can see how transformational life can become. And so when we experience that ourselves, it's just so much richer when we are supporting others. And that inner work is continuous anyway, but yeah, that's the only prerequisite for it.
I got you. Radhika, I think this is a good time to pause. Thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find you?
You're so welcome. And my main places, hangouts, are definitely Instagram. So at the spiritual underscore psychologist. I have a website, thespiritualpsychologist.co.uk, a podcast called The Spiritual Psychologist. So those are the main places where you can find me.
Awesome. It's been an honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you.